Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to another episode of Healing Ties 2.0, featured on the Whole Care Network and on UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio. I'm your host and presenter, Christopher McClellan. You just might know me as the Bowtie Guy. On today's episode, we feature author, attorney, and award-winning journalist Ellen Rittberg, whose humorous essays and features have appeared in the New York Times, Huffington Post, Reader's Digest, and many, many more major platforms. After being a caregiver to her mother for 6 years and realizing that even though she'd represented other senior citizens for many years and had written reports and recommendations for judges on other cases, she felt overwhelmed and largely clueless when she began her caregiving journey with her mom. From her personal and professional experience, Ellen wrote, "Why is my grandma naked? Caring for your aging parents in a practical and humorous way because of her belief that all caregivers are stressed to some extent and humor can lighten the burden." Let's join my conversation with Ellen and you'll pick up on her humor, and I'll see you on the other side of our conversation. Well, greetings, Ellen, and welcome to another episode of Healing Ties 2.0. It is great to visit with you today.
Well, thank you for having me, Chris.
I know we've had some delightful conversations leading up to our visit today, but, Ellen, as I'm prone to do with all my guests, I want to know, how are you creating Healing Ties?
I'm so glad you're asking that, Chris. Currently, my book, which is called Why is Grandma Naked? Caring for Your Aging Parent, came out 2 months ago, and I'm speaking at local libraries, and I did one book launch, and if I get ambitious, I'll do as many book launches in counties that will have me, and sharing the things I learned and the things that I hope are helpful to current caregivers, people that are contemplating becoming caregivers, and people who aren't either in those groups, but will laugh, and at some point in the future, they may be a caregiver or have been a caregiver, and they're going to, laugh and perhaps learn and perhaps find it useful.
Laughing and caregiving are sometimes, those two don't go together, but we really do need to laugh from time to time.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Although we don't always laugh at the time of the thing that's occurring.
That's right. But the other thing I want to know is, why is Grandma naked?
Okay. Everybody asks that has not been a caregiver of somebody that has suffered from dementia or something that makes them want to just whip off their clothes. But one day, I was sitting with my mother. I had moved in. I moved in with her. I don't think that's necessary for everybody that caregives, but it gave me an insight that I might not have otherwise had. And we were sitting at a table in front of a large picture window that fronted on 2 major streets. And Mom stood up and just started taking off her clothes. At the time, I was shocked, even though my background is I am an attorney who used to represent people on geriatric units, psychiatric units. So I should say either I had seen it or knew about it. But I was shocked and very quickly closed the curtain. And then probably I may have had a hearty laugh at the time, or it may have happened later when I remembered, and found out that other people had similar experiences with their mom, dad, aunt, uncle, cousin, sister, or whoever.
It's interesting, as you said something there that jogged my mind. As an attorney, and you're working with folks that are kind of in the caregiving experience, and then you become a caregiver yourself, and you kind of, you just almost are answering my question before I even ask it. When these experiences happen to you as a caregiver, you think about, goodness, I've talked to all these people before. Now I'm seeing it firsthand. It must have been different for you.
Well, I'll tell you something. I think there was an entire disconnect, I have to say. The things I learned at work or the seminars I attended, which I occasionally attended, they could have been full-day seminars about dementia. They were of little or no use to me because it was my own life. And I say about myself that stress makes me stupid. So the first thing that happens is all of my logic goes straight out the window. So I approached the task just like a loving daughter. And my attorney training, let me tell you something, was of very little use.
It went out, the attorney training went out the door because it was personal. It was personal.
Yeah. I think that happens with our lives. We can't be objective about our own lives. And also when something is so important to us and our plate is so full, you're not going to remember a particular thing or fact that you were taught, you know? That's my theory, anyway.
Well, I could relate to that, and I've had the pleasure of talking to thousands of people throughout my advocacy work, especially after caregiving has ended, that kind of share those same thoughts because we're not often prepared for it, especially for ourselves.
That's true. Very true.
So why is it important for caregivers not to go solo?
Low meaning low.
Solo.
Solo, S-O-L-O. I thought he meant S-O space L-O-W.
Solo.
Okay, that is one of the major points in my book is don't go it alone. And I think for many caregivers, a lot of times if you have other siblings, my experience, and many people have said, there's usually one sibling who does, if not the lion's share of the caregiving, the preponderant amount of the caregiving. And when you start to do it, there's just all kinds of things that you start to do and also that come down the pike, usually unexpectedly. And you just don't want to bother other siblings. I know my older sister had retired and she had worked very, very hard, and I wanted her to enjoy her leisure time. And she lived close by, but that didn't matter. I didn't want to burden her, I felt. And I felt that my relationship with my mom was such that I could do it, better than her. She used to describe me as being the good daughter. She wasn't a bad daughter, but I think that happens. There's a family dynamic that occurs. And then, of course, there are some people who are only children, so they don't even have that option.
Oh goodness, we could do a whole discussion on that. But and I've always wondered what would be easier, having siblings to help share in the care, or is it easier for somebody that is an only child to do it? And I don't know. There's a lot of different thoughts and processes about that. So some people want to just do that by themselves, but it's really hard.
Yeah, well, I know a therapist who's very wise who told me she thinks if there's any way to not just have one child, have more than one child, because it's a very huge responsibility, and you soon learn to call on other people, family members or others, and to create a support network or a system that's going to work as you go through this system of your parents' caregiving.
Creating a care team is one of the main components for every caregiver, but it's easier said than done. I'm interested to tap into your experience with both professionally and personally, how some of that had manifested.
Oh, happy to tell you. I say in my book, you're not good at everything. Nobody's good at everything. And it's not an insult, because that's what happens. You think, oh, in the amount of time it would take me to explain what has to be done, I'll do it myself. But right. Sooner or later, you find there's just way too much to do. And if you don't ask other people, if you don't enlist other people in your family, they're not going to feel comfortable doing stuff, especially hands-on stuff. So, be smart. And there's a human need. I really believe this. We all need to feel needed. A lot of the ills in the world are just people that are aimless and don't have, they are not feeling valued and needed. And that goes for family members. And sometimes you don't even know, as an adult sibling, a particular aptitude that your sibling has because you no longer live with them. So right. Just bear that in mind.
Well, right. And I say this quite often when this topic comes up. And so I don't want to bore my listeners, but it's probably the first time you and I've talked about it. I like to use a sports analogy when it relates to creating a care team. Baseball is really the easiest way to explain it. The most successful baseball teams have a variety of players that have different talents and skills. You can't have a baseball team that's all home run hitters because they just wouldn't be successful. You need people on the team that can do a variety of things. to help the team succeed. And it's the same for caregiving.
So true.
You need a variety of people that can come in and help you out. You need the pinch hitter who can be there in a moment's notice, that you know they just live down the street and they've always said to you, if I can do anything for you, if I can go to the store, just call me, and if I'm available, I'll do it. You know, when the emergency comes up, say yes. Or the other thing that people are often wondering about in caregiving is, if I come and help out, do I have to help with the toileting?
Okay, I have a chapter. Do you want me to address that, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a long chapter, and I hope it's funny. Oh, thank you, Chris. I hope it makes people laugh out loud. And what I say is, and I can say from my own personal experience, my father used to like to tell a story that when I was a newborn, my mother couldn't find me in the nursery, and suddenly she looked and there was an open window, and there, I'm a redhead, so he saw this redheaded baby with her backside up in the air, this little red backside, and that was me, and and I was getting rained on in an open window because I had a diaper rash. Well, guess what? As your parent becomes more and more incontinent, there are all these stages, and part of your job might be to help them get what I call your rump on the hump, which is the toilet seat hump. Yeah, and so you're seeing, your parents saw you, or my mother saw me. She saw me rump side up. Well, you're going to see your parent rump side down, and your aim is to get your parent to the toilet in a time-bound fashion. And if they are suffering from dementia, or they're just declining and their judgment is going downhill, they're not going to give themselves adequate time to get to the bathroom. So it's a combination of escorting them sometimes to the bathroom, and having that extra set of clothes that parents of toddlers always have if you're going out.
To just be quite frank about this conversation, this part of the caregiving team, it's not something that everybody's comfortable with. And that's okay. But the important thing is to at least have the conversation to find out who can help with what.
That's right.
So that you can build that strong team that can help you out at a moment's notice, so that you can take care of yourself as well.
That's a great point. But not only that, you may do it at the beginning, and then as you build your support network, somebody else may take over that function. I know when I showered my mother for the first time, that was kind of shocking because she was very modest, and maybe I saw a little flash of something when I was a child, and even that stayed in my mind to this very day. But I'd never seen Mom in the altogether. And I like to say jokingly, even if you are an exercise fanatic or walk a lot, you might be looking at yourself, 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road, a replica of yourself, a future you. So, it gives you a healthier view of the aging process, if nothing else.
And I from my personal experience, and again, my listeners are probably saying he's going to say this again, but it's important to recognize that when the caregiver and the care partner, and I use the generic term care partner when I chat, some of those experiences, especially as it relates to toileting, are when people are at their are most vulnerable. And what I've experienced myself, and in talking to other people, that in those vulnerable moments, some of the most meaningful conversations that two people can have, because what else is there at these times? And some of the best conversations that I had with my partner were right then at those vulnerable moments, because we could talk openly and honestly about where this was all going.
That's a very good point. I mean, if you undertake to be a caregiver, you learn so much about that person, but you also learn stuff about yourself that you might not even realize until after the fact, after that person is gone or is in a much different state from when you began your caregiving.
Yeah, and caregiving evolves. It starts out with little things, little tasks, and then it progresses. And especially for for those like yourself who are caring for somebody with dementia.
Yes, yes. I think also too, the person that is being cared for, there's such a wide range of personalities at play. You know, my mother was a quiet, dignified older woman, and she had a lot of quirks. I used to say about her, and she didn't really interact with the neighbors because she felt they were talking about her, so she preferred not to interact with them. And then she was the only older person that was left in the neighborhood. So I used to say that she would have made an excellent CIA agent or MI5 agent, because she felt if you ever talked about yourself and the person knew more about you than you found out about that person in a conversation, you were a blab and you were a failure as a human being. So she was a solitary person, but that's just one type of person. And I describe what it's like to deal with somebody who doesn't have, some of those other people to call upon at first, So I ended up doing lots more, I think, at the beginning.
At the beginning, well, because it was new for both of you.
Yeah.
I get the sense that your mom was probably pretty independent.
Absolutely. And that's the thing about most parents. They have a certain level of independence. If they live alone, they've been independent. If they're a widow or widower or never got married, they don't have to account for things or account to anybody. And suddenly you're telling them to do things. I call it, be the alpha dog. You become this alpha dog, this, sometimes bossy but nice and loving, but you have to tell them what to do. And that's quite a reversal. Yeah.
It is quite a reversal. Some people use the term, I don't particularly care for it, but I think it's appropriate, parenting your parents when we talk about these situations, because goodness, most parents don't want to burden their children with taking care of them.
Yes, I think that is an accurate assessment if you look at the landscape of parents out there. Yeah.
Thankfully, we have listeners all over the world on Healing Ties, but in the United States, grandparents, they want to be independent. It's not in our, I want to make sure I use the right word here. It's not in our cultural background per se, to where most people, I've got to be careful there too, but will take care of their parents. In other cultures, it's just kind of given.
Yeah.
That the family, as we age, everybody takes care of themselves. And I often wonder, as a single person myself, where's that going to go for me? I don't. Maybe that's why I want to move to Spain.
Yeah,
that's a whole other conversation.
Absolutely.
I wonder. I wonder about that as it relates with your relationship with your mom and caring for a parent and changing the roles. It's got to be difficult.
Right. And I should add that my book pertains really to any kind of a caregiver. I say it's caring for your aging parents because that's what I did. And, I think that there was a paucity of humorous books that could approach the subject in a humorous vein. But you as a caregiver for someone that was not your parent, I think you can relate to my book and the things that I say, that they comport with the view of caregiving and how things play out. Would you agree?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so.
And the challenges are equivalent, whether you're caring for a partner, an aging partner, or an aging parent, or an aging sibling, or a dear friend that you've undertaken, God bless, to do it for.
Right, and that's kind of what binds us together and why we do these podcasts and we share our stories, because our stories help other people who are either isolated or in this for the first time or have been doing this for a long period of time, because we connect through our stories. We recognize that we're not the only ones doing this. And I'm a big proponent that the best information and referral is from one caregiver to another, because we've been in the trenches. We understand.
Yes. And that is a good metaphor, in the trenches, right?
Yeah, in the trenches. There was something that you had mentioned previously in one of our conversations about it kind of like you to expound on it a little bit more. Why do we need to purge the word convenient from our vocabulary?
Okay. And this applies to people who are not the primary caregivers, because if you're I'll call it a primary caregiver, that person that does the lion's share or the preponderant amount of caregiving, you know that things happen and they're almost always unexpected, whether it's a health emergency, an aide may not show up, something that is all of a sudden almost in a crisis mode, right?
No, I have to interrupt you. Do you mean the caregiving day, Ellen, doesn't go smoothly? I mean, everything that you have scheduled for the day, it just doesn't happen.
No. And not only that, if people aren't used to that fact and you ask them to do something, they may have something scheduled, and maybe it's not work related, but they have a schedule and a routine, and you're interrupting their routine and asking them to do something. Guess what? That's how it goes. My mother had whooping cough. She got whooping cough. I mean, would you guess somebody had whooping cough when she had it 75 or 80 years before that, and it came back? No.
I think I know a profession that is schedule orientated and might have problems with adjusting schedule, being an attorney.
Well, the thing is I think that I was, when I had to be in court at a certain time, okay? Right. And at the beginning, the things I needed to do, and it's a continuum, caregiving. So at the beginning, Mom had somebody when she fell and came back from the rehabilitation center, so there was an aide there. But then Mom got better physically, but she needed help, I felt, and I just didn't want to leave her alone all day. So I found a companion who was with her for 5 hours a day. And even though I worked an 8-hour day, I was more concerned about having her eating and socializing, and that person drove, and they could get her out of the house. And we found a perfect person for her. And that lady liked to take her sock shopping. Socks, socks you wear on your feet. She loved going sock shopping with this person. And it was great because it brought out her sociability and it brought her out of her shell. So there's things you do along the way so that you can still work. I was working full time and I had a long commute. So you develop networks if you are working full time. Not everybody is, I was. And, there are choices you make. And, sometimes they're financial and you need to work.
Exactly, yeah. Because it comes back to the word we were talking about, convenient, because at times caregiving is not convenient.
That's right.
Schedules.
That's right. And you have to educate people, right? You have to educate.
Right. There's emergencies.
Mm-hmm.
Invariably, there is an emergency, and what you have planned for the day can go by the wayside in a moment's notice.
So true.
How do you deal with that? Especially if you're regimented, and you have a schedule, and you're so close to adhering to that schedule, and all of a sudden this caregiving world comes in.
Yes.
What's a person to do?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, one of the things is in a way, I think if you are able and you're working and you can find the support system at a certain point, that your mind may be preoccupied for part of that day of things you have to do or phone calls you have to make that you make around work or during your lunch hour or whatever. But there are times when work can really help you to not totally have this morass of information that has to do with that person you're caregiving for, because it can really be very overwhelming psychologically. So, I'm not saying everybody should work, but there are pluses if you're working and you can have that support network and not have to caregive for the parent full time at a certain point. But if you are caregiving, I talk about you have to do stuff, whether it's, and I joke about this, while Mom watched Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune, if I needed my exercise, it was a carpeted room, I would just be jogging in place while we watched TV, or walking in place, marching, because it didn't set her off the marching, you know. But I needed that for my own, I guess, mental health, you know. So you have to hold on to some routine or something that's very vital to your own well-being, and that, I think, is very critical as a caregiver.
Right, and it brings me to one of my mantras. Perfect introduction into this. Thank you, Ellen. Self-care is really job number one for every caregiver, but it's one of the hardest parts of caregiving for a caregiver, especially a new caregiver, to learn.
So true. So, and you know, when I do my social media, even though mom is gone, we have other things in our life that are obligations, but you still have to think about what it is that you can give to the world, and not, you know, I say, am I adding or am I subtracting to the universe? I want to be the best person I can be, and one of those things is I have to do things for myself that make me feel happy, you know.
Finding that balance is so critical in the caregiving experience, because you give up so much of yourself that you get lost, and you know, your hobbies get lost,
Yes.
things that you like to do for yourself that gets lost.
Yes.
And then what comes from there? Frustration.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had a group, I had written my first book about parenting, and I was in a book group with a group of women. We'd all written books, and we all came out for each other's book launches, and if one of us was giving a speech someplace or facilitating a discussion. But that was once a month, and again, barring any emergencies, that I didn't want to give up. It was just important for me to feel I had this one routine, and there were probably months I missed. I can't even remember. You know, a lot of times you blot out a lot of things. There was too much going on. And I remember I left very early from that meeting because I had to take a train to get home to mom. And right. I needed that. I just didn't want to give it up.
We're talking a little bit about your mom, and as my listeners know, you know, my caregiving experience did not include dementia. We were dealing with cancer, and I always like to ask this question to folks like yourself when you're caring for somebody with dementia, and having those, as the conversations change per se with your mom, your care partner, and how to keep it as realistic and real as it can be as these changes come in cognitive awareness.
Yeah. Well, I think also that's a very good question. I think that one of the things about mom having dementia, she may have had it very, very mildly, if not from the beginning, but at a certain point. But I so prided myself on my mother's smartness. She wasn't a college-educated person or anything like that, but she read voraciously. She could skim, I don't know if she totally read it, at least she read several books a week. So, and that didn't go away till, can you imagine? What's that?
I admire that.
Yes. I tell you, many of us don't right now, especially if you're promoting a book, for example. But what happened was when mom's signs of dementia first came, I believe, which were judgment things. She would do like slightly, foolish things, like she was driving, which I can tell you about. Maybe she shouldn't have been driving at that point, but the deal was she was going to come home at night when it was dark. I mean, that's just a common sense issue. And I had to hunt her down a lot to just I'd call up the local CVS because she was a creature of routine. I'd call the pharmacy. Hi, have you seen Mrs. Prober? That's my middle name, Ellen Prober Rittberg. Oh yeah, Mrs. Prober's there. We see her down aisle 3, or she was just there 5 minutes ago. And so those things, the thing about dementia, whatever the person suffers from, you're seeing a different person. And you're dealing with that person slightly differently, or maybe not at all at the beginning because you're denying it. But at a certain point, you realize, like mom had something with her shoulder. I forget what you call it, her rotator cuff. Mom had a rotator cuff injury, and mom used to go to her doctors by herself up until almost she was 90. I then started to I thought it'd be a good idea to meet her doctors, even though she at that point had no cognitive impairment. Mom one day said to me, you caused my shoulder injury. I said, Mom, first of all, Mom had it for years. And I remember her telling me, her doctor said, you're too old to operate on it. And I know I didn't cause it, but she insisted that I pushed her and I caused her shoulder injury. And I was like, that's part of Mom's, the thing that sometimes happens with people with dementia. They have this paranoia or a belief that's not a true belief. And a lot of times it has to do with family members. So it's like, okay, Mom, I don't know if I ever said, okay, Mom, I pushed you, but I didn't even bother to argue. And she only said it once or twice, but it's painful when your parent accuses you of hurting them and it's totally not true. But that's one of the things you have to adjust to.
And I think the other important component here, Ellen, is when these conversations come up, and they invariably do, especially in early stages, family members don't really recognize when they're being accused of something that there is a problem with their parent or their spouse or the person who is at an early stage, because they haven't been prepared to recognize some of these changes, and that's when it escalates. And you, instead of using the kind of theory of yes, but, and moving on to another, redirecting the conversation, people want to have that direct conversation. I didn't do that. That's not me. What are you talking about? And what happens there? It just, everything just escalates and gets out of hand.
So true.
Oh, goodness. What a delightful conversation we're having.
I'm enjoying this.
I think this is a great spot for us to take our break. And now, Ellen, when we come back from the break, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to want to know one fun fact about you that I know our listeners are sitting on the edge of their seats wanting to know. So put your thinking cap on.
Okay.
You're listening to Healing Ties, featured on the Whole Care Network and UK Health Radio, the world's #1 talk health radio. We'll be right back. Hey, it's Christopher McClellan. You just might know me as the Bowtie Guy on Healing Ties 2.0. On Healing Ties, we visit with people from all over the globe who share their stories, because it's through story sharing where diversity meets the road to collaborate on a common cause. And if you'd like to share your story on Healing Ties, email me direct at thebowtieguy@healingties.com. We would love to share your story to your health, happiness, and prosperity. Coming up next week on Healing Ties.
Hi, I'm Cian Xiao. Join us next week on Healing Ties, where we talk with Chris about why palliative care shouldn't be a scary word and how it can be part of a waiting room revolution.
Well, welcome back, everybody. I am just delighted to continue with our wonderful conversation with author Ellen Prober Rittberg. So, Ellen,
Yes.
we're having such a delightful conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your experience about your mom.
My pleasure.
Wonderful news about your book. I can't imagine Grandma being naked, but but now I'm not going to ask you to get naked, but I'm going to ask you to give us one fun fact about you that we haven't talked about and that you'd like to share with all of our listeners.
I don't know how much fun it is, but I produced and wrote a play that was in a festival 2 years ago. That was a lot. Yeah, and it was, again, with caregiving. It was unfinished business. It was a play I'd written many years ago. Life intervened, family, and then going to law school, becoming an attorney, and writing other things, but leaving those plays behind. And after Mom had passed, I knew that play was calling to me. It was unfinished business, and I felt it was worthy of an audience, and so I rewrote it. Discovered I don't like producing, but I love working with the actors. And I find my New York accent gets less because I'm dealing with people with trained speech, which is a wonderful thing. Yeah, and I managed to have two sellout or near sellout audiences in a 100+ people theater. And it was satisfying because I was sharing a message I had, which was about freedom and love and, all good things. And that was exciting. So there's my fun fact. I don't know if it's fun.
That's a delightful fun fact, because that's kind of fits into exactly what we're doing here. We're sharing love and care and concern, and we're trying to reach people and help them in their journey, because we all know that somewhere along the line, we're all going to either be a caregiver or need a caregiver.
Yes, that's a very wise statement, and a lot of people just don't think about that because they only know what they know when they know it.
Exactly, and that kind of brings me to another thought that I'd really love to have you expound on. Is why is it important to maintain your own self of self? Sense of self.
Sense of self. It's a tongue twister.
Why is it so important for caregivers to do that?
Okay. Well, a happy caregiver, or a caregiver who is sufficiently empathetic, needs to have something to make their life a little lighter, or their burden a little lighter. And so if you don't have that, you're not going to be as good a caregiver as you could be. This is my contention. I don't think it's a selfishness on my part that made me know I needed to do a little bit of exercise, even if it's thumping on the in the den while watching the TV. Just holding on to that routine. And you mentioned holding on to a routine and varying it, because a lot of times you have to be very flexible and adaptable as the situation presents itself. You may not be able to leave the house, and you have an urge to, get out that energy, and you want to show respect to the person you're caregiving for, and you want to also be cheerful, because their life may, as much as you may sometimes regard your life as not being a picnic, their life certainly is not a picnic. So,
right, and I think we oftentimes, especially in those days, those frustrating days, we forget about our care partner. Again, using the generic term, they're the ones with the diagnosis. We, as the caregiver, we're kind of the co-pilot. We're there to support and advocate.
That's a great way of putting it. Also, I mean, to the extent to which you could discover things about the person to make their life happier. In Mom's case, Mom had never been a joiner, but I knew that she liked going out every day, driving her car, and at one point she stopped driving, but up until close in time, she was driving around and had a routine. And I knew that if I could get her into a senior program where she could socialize, even though she'd been a solitary person, that she might like it. And I found a program, met with the director, and told them Mom was the kind of person, if she didn't feel people liked her, she wasn't going to come back after that first visit. And they made a real good attempt, and she had a blast. She had so much fun. This very dignified, serious lady I have a picture of her wearing like a fright wig and Halloween. I mean, it's just so out of character for her, but she made little arts and crafts things. She made a little spoon holder for my daughter and painted it. These things she never did her whole life, and suddenly enjoyed doing in her new state of being, if you will.
And what a wonderful piece for you to remember her by.
That's a great point, Chris. We want to have those happy memories, and I will tell you, if I can be, I don't say I'm proud of this. I feel almost as I gave Mom I feel like her happy times. I helped to provide happy times for her and companionship, which is why I stayed for 6 years, and she didn't want me to move out. I'd sold my own home. I really wasn't planning on moving in with my mother, but I felt I needed to do that because she needed me there. Yeah.
You gave her a beautiful sunset.
Thanks. I appreciate you saying that. And that is very gratifying, really.
It is very gratifying, and I say this often because I know my listener, he's going to say it again. Well, I am going to say it again, but there's two very common aspects to caregiving. There's a beginning and there's an end, and we're not prepared for either one of these life-changing events. But I will attest to everybody out there, once it's over, you'll look back in your own time. You'll look back and you'll realize that the good days far outweighed the bad days while you're in the middle of it. It's just that those bad days were so intense and it was so prevalent in your experience while you were in the middle of it. But when it ends, you'll think back and you'll look at those fun days, those days that you just mentioned, those crafts that your mom made, wearing the wig, doing those things that made her happy because you had made her happy in being with her. So, Ellen, this is what a great conversation with you.
It's my pleasure. And also you've walked in those, both walked in those moccasins, and I think that only caregivers understand what caregiving entails. Right. It could be a different diagnosis, it could have been a different set of specific experiences, but you look at that total ball of experiences, and it is, I contend, transforming. I'm not the same person I was when I began.
It's transforming. It's you're not the same person, and I am a big proponent that it is an honor to be a caregiver.
Yes.
And for my friends over in the UK, it's an honor to be a carer, because we have different we have different descriptions. In sharing our stories, we help others who come after us in this caregiving journey. So Ellen, what's next for you? Do you have I know you had another book. Do you have any other books?
Yes, thank you for asking.
Tell all of our listeners how they can find out more about you and your wonderful story.
Okay. Well, number one, you can find on Amazon, Why is Grandma Naked? Caring for Your Aging Parent, just by putting in Why is Grandma Naked, or my name, Ellen Prober Rittberg, P-O-B-E-R, and Rittberg. I have a website, Ellen Rittberg, R-I-T-T-B-E-R-G. And I also wrote a parenting book called 35 Things Your Teen Won't Tell You, So I Will, another humorous how-to book about parenting teenagers, because as an attorney, I represented children and teens, and I had 3 kids in 3 years, so I survived their teen years with my sanity largely intact. And now, this month, I have a poetry book coming out called He is Walking Wider. It's being published by Kelsey Books. It's a poetry press, and that's very exciting. And it's a full-length book of poetry. There are 2 poems about mom in it, a number of poems about family members, nature, feelings. And I am working on, I have a novel that I finished that I may be putting up on Amazon in serial form, or maybe the whole book. Its tentative title is, I won't say what the title is because it's in flux, but it's finished, and editing it.
That'll be for our next conversation.
Yeah.
Any more plays in the works?
If anybody wants to do a play about freedom and love, it's called Sci-Fi. It's a full-length. It's not a full-length. It's a hour-long play about an unfree society where a plumber who's not permitted to talk to somebody from the ruling class comes in and tells her a secret about what really happened in the past and transforms them. So it's about ideas. I'm happy to bring it to any venue that wants to do it. And I have another one called Sabbath Elevator that's a Me Too play that I think the Me Too movement is not finished, and there's going to be lots more plays that are going to be coming up.
More plays,
yeah.
That's certainly an important topic.
Yeah.
Ellen, with the great work that you're doing, with your terrific writing, you are certainly someone who's creating healing ties all around us. I can't thank you enough for joining me today, and I look forward to another visit with you down the road.
I would love that, Chris, and thank you for providing me with a very stimulating conversation that got me to thinking, and your insights. So I really appreciate the opportunity you've given me.
What a delightfully fun conversation with Ellen today. Sometimes humor is the best way of dealing with stressful situations, and I encourage you to pick up a copy of Ellen's book, Why is Grandma Naked? Caring for Your Aging Parent. You will not be disappointed. Well, that does it for this episode of Healing Ties. Thanks always for listening. And if you would like to share your story on Healing Ties, email me direct at thebowtieguy@healingties.com. We would love to share your story on Healing Ties. As you know, I'm your host and presenter, Christopher McClellan. I've created a life to love after caregiving ends by being with awesome people like you. Be sure to subscribe to Healing Ties wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. We'll see you for another episode of Healing Ties real soon. Take care. Bye for now.